The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. It is about 5 until the top of the hour, so I just want to let you know we're going to get started in about 5 minutes. Until then, you'll probably just see my screen, but we'll get going right at the top of the hour. Morning or afternoon to those on the line. Just a reminder that we're going to be starting in about 2 minutes right at the top of the hour. All right. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks for joining me for today's webinar on some of the changes that stores are making due to new expectations and customer experience, as well as new requirements that are being put in place by state and local governments. Today, we're going to focus on some short-term, more safety-oriented changes, as well as some of the longer-term ones that are coming about due to changes in customers' expectations and behavior. Let's start off with introductions. My name is Chris Hogue, and I run the strategy and product at Live Area. If you haven't heard of Live Area before, we're a global commerce agency offering advice, design, and implementation of all things commerce. So this covers brand and performance marketing campaigns to design and build of commerce sites, to store innovation and operations, through fulfillment, customer service, or as we like to call it, simply end-to-end commerce. A few notes on logistics. Obviously, everyone on the phone is muted, so I cannot hear you, which means we can't really have an interactive dialogue. But if you do have questions, please send them in via the chat feature. In the GoToMeeting, you should have an option to chat. So if you have questions, please feel free to type them in. I'll try and set aside 10, 15 minutes towards the end where I can address some of the questions that come through. I'll address as many as I can in the time that we have remaining at the end. But any that I can't get to, I'm happy to provide written responses to. The OIA will send out a copy or send out a link to a recording of the webinar for anyone who wasn't able to make it. And in that link will also include answers to any questions. And with that, I thought we could start by talking about some good news for a change. And you're gonna have to bear with me for a second, but we're very used to seeing a lot of numbers like this. And I realize that there's downward facing arrows on the page, and you're seeing things like year over year declines in retail. Certainly clothing and apparel has been hit pretty hard, especially when looking at sales over the past month. Even sporting goods and hobby has seen about a 38% decrease. But things are looking up. So what you're seeing right here is a chart that shows what's called the switch volume growth by MasterCard. And for those that aren't necessarily familiar with the term switched, basically it's a term for their authorization, clearing, and settlement of transactions. So what you're sort of looking at here is a chart that's showing transaction volume. In theory, transaction volume picking back up again. So it looks like we hit the low point on about April 14th, where you see about a negative 26 volume in what they traditionally had expected to be the number of transactions they'd expected to have. When they reported May 7th, it's only down by like 7% year over year. So the market seems to be stabilizing, and in some cases, we seem to be moving actually towards a normalization. This is also backed up by the fact that we're starting to see states reopen. A lot of them have very different approaches and regulations at this point, but testing the waters is a really necessary first step to recovery. I actually think since I pulled this chart, I read that Alaska has actually removed all restrictions and told businesses, or all businesses, that they're free to reopen. Many are establishing their own safety protocols, but the government has essentially cleared every business to open. So we're starting to see some real progress here as well. We don't necessarily know what the outcome of this will be, but it's a really good sign that we're starting to see some progress in this space. And even better, people really want to get outside. So what you see here is a Google Trends chart, and we're just really tracking interest in outdoor recreation right here. But you can see the spike is quite large. We expect to see a spike every spring, as you'll see when you go back towards 2018 and 2019. But this is quite an impressive spike that we have here. Something like I think golf accessory searches are up by like 600%. People are looking at roller skates. It's up 400. Motorboats are up 300. Volleyball nets, basketball 200. Tents, fishing, hiking. you name it, across the board, everything's seeing like 100+% rise in interest. So good news, right? And with these hopeful signs, we thought it was a really good time to look at how the retail experience has changed as a result of the past 3 or 4 months, and really start to look at what the new normal looks like. So we've grouped our thoughts into 2 categories. The first being what we hope are short-lived changes, those changes that stores generally have to make to help ensure the safety of their employees and their customers. A lot of it due to state requirements, but just also due to the fact that we don't necessarily know that the coronavirus is controlled just yet, whether that be through development of therapeutics, treatments, the vaccine, or just herd immunity. So some of the short-term changes that we put in place, and then we'll look at some longer-term changes that are taking place as a result of just those changes in customer behavior. So on the short-lived side, the first thing that we really want to get across is obviously the safety of our employees and customers is our #1 goal as we start to reopen. But when it comes to bringing shoppers back to stores, don't overlook the importance of making people feel safe. In fact, we would actually say that emotional safety, that idea that I can feel safe coming in to any sort of environment, is probably it's more important than the actual physical safety when it comes to actually bringing somebody in the store. And that can be different for different people, but it's important that we understand the best ways to do that for all parties. I'll start first with just the basics, things that you've probably seen before, so I won't spend a tremendous amount of time here. Obviously, simple things like masks for employees. You come in contact with a lot of different people. I think there's a study that says most people tend to touch their face about 23 times. I can't remember, 23 times per hour, I believe. It's ridiculously high. But when you start to look at things like masks, one of the things that I suggest is there's been a lot of retail organizations that have switched production to make the personal protective equipment, the PPE. So I'd consider looking for masks that you can purchase from those folks. Places I know like Outdoor Research, Timbuktu, Mystery Ranch. A lot of them have halted production of things like backpacks in order to make face masks. So giving back to those people that have really helped to fight the coronavirus, I think is a really nice ad when you're looking at doing this kind of stuff. Hand sanitizer. I'd highly suggest hand sanitizer even over gloves. Unless you're going to hand out gloves to every person that comes into the store, I just ask them to use hand sanitizer. It reduced the number of wastes, and people are going to come in and touch the surfaces. And this is a good way to kill the virus as people come in. If you can use motion detected refillable ones as opposed to plastic bottles, and even make it a perk, right, by filling it with sanitizer from brands like Humankind or Puracy that have moisturizer in them, but also donate a portion of the proceeds to organizations that are helping out those on the front lines. Sneeze guards operating at limited capacity to keep crowds down, regular cleaning of surfaces, things like doors, door handles, counters, any frequently touched surface, especially metal, plastic, and glass is highly recommended. When you start to look at things like, the times that the virus can last on any surface, I think metal and plastic are the 2 most frequently where it can survive the longest. Glass is something like, 3 days maybe. So anyway, clean it thoroughly. Nightly cleanings if you can. Both CDC and NRF recommend that you clean the surface with soap and water before disinfecting it. So ideally, if you can afford to hire a crew, that's always a good idea. If you are doing it yourself at night, again, ideally clean it before you disinfect it, and focus mostly on those surfaces that can, that the virus can live on long enough. Some other considerations that you might want to look into, breaking up high traffic areas is an interesting one. If you have racks of on sale merchandise that tend to sit in the back of the store, you might want to consider breaking some of that up into different areas so that you don't get large groups of people huddled together, all going through them at the same time. If you can make use of outdoor space, like sidewalks, or if traffic is light and you can claim some unused parking space, again, pulling those racks outside where people tend to gather is a really good idea, because the outdoors, the wind, it tends to dissipate, as opposed to when you're staying inside. Separating areas for processing sales and returns. A lot of times we tend to do both of them at the same counter. So it not only can create bottlenecks where I have people both returning and purchasing merchandise in the same place, but if I'm getting a bunch of merchandise returned back, having them take it to a different counter so that the person that just took a return from somebody that who's had a piece of merchandise and has been who knows where, touches somebody who's buying something, who touches their stuff right after, that's a good idea, both from a physical and emotional level. Rolling out mobile payment terminals, if you have the capability, is another really nice idea, allowing you not to have to, move everybody to a specific counter in order to complete a transaction. And there's plenty of options out there. Companies like Square, Shopify all offer them as part of their POS solutions, as well as a number of others. So, rolling these things out can be a nice advantage to customers, allowing them to make a transaction wherever they happen to be in the store, but also breaks up crowds as well, which is kind of nice. And then when we look at things like specific to people who are selling clothes, a lot of questions come up around, sanitization of changing rooms. What do I need to do for sanitizing clothing? So because the coronavirus tends to live the longest on hard surfaces, sanitizing changing rooms after each use is something we'd recommend, especially any stainless steel or plastic surfaces where it can live up to 7 days. It's also been shown to live up to 4 days on glass. So you need to make sure you clean mirrors, doors, any windows regularly as well. When it comes to clothing, there's not a tremendous amount of research. But what we have found is there is some research from the University of North Carolina that indicates that porous surfaces, such as fabric, doesn't allow the virus to survive as long, because of its size. There's small spaces or holes that can trap the virus and prevent its transfer. But a lot of times clothing does have things like zippers or buttons, and it can live longer on those hard surfaces. So, we would suggest quarantining items that are returned for 3 days if you don't have a facility to sanitize them before. When it does come to sanitizing them, it's generally a good idea. But if you don't have, obviously you don't want to use a lot of chemicals on your clothing. But so if you have the opportunity, we suggest keeping a steamer or something in the back room. In steaming clothes that have been tried on but not purchased, or ones that have been returned, a steamer will generally produce heat at around 212 degrees. And so while the virus can't survive in temperatures above 167 degrees. So, this is a pretty good option for the environment, because I'm not, and it's better option for honestly your clothing or your products as well, because you're not necessarily having to put a bunch of chemicals and products on them. So it's usually quite a nice, we thought it was kind of a nice solution, as long as you can do it at scale. Moving on from sort of just the physical aspects of safety and looking more towards the emotional ones. We think a general rule is just over communicate whenever possible. Share safety procedures across all your communication channels. Don't wait to tell somebody what you expect of them, and until when they show up at your front door. So obviously putting posters up in your store in multiple locations with a shopping protocol is a great idea. Emailing your customers before you open, or even after you've opened, with those changes to the shopping experience, so that they know what to expect, really helps. If somebody comes to your store knowing exactly what's going to be asked of them, it helps make sure that they can be prepared for it. and bring whatever materials they need. And then explaining why you're asking them to alter their behavior, really helps a lot. If you're going to ask them to take certain precautions, knowing why I'm asking you to take it, generally also lessens that barrier. Ensuring all your associates can speak to those safety procedures is another really important thing. It helps create consistency of message and reinforces that you know what you're doing. So if you have a protocol up on the window and whoever's in the store happens to have an entirely different protocol, you're not necessarily reinforcing the message, and it feels kind of haphazard. So making sure that everyone is sort of sticking to the same script, especially within regions, is super important. You don't want somebody, if you have a couple stores in neighboring towns and you have entirely different procedures going on in those different towns, you're starting to set different sets of expectations. So at least regionally, do your best to make sure that you're all able to speak to it and performing the same procedures. And since we're talking about humans, don't underestimate the importance of humans in store. I know we're trying to limit the number of people in stores, but like a friendly, knowledgeable person can have a huge impact on making shoppers feel taken care of and making them feel like you have everything under control, right? An associate to on hand who can not only help enforce policies, but help shoppers expedite their trips or even handle merchandise for them, even especially for the nervous customers, it really helps pull them over the barrier. It might make, not only that experience more enjoyable, but, make them more likely to come back. So, simple things like, guided shopping, having somebody come in and walk you through the store, based on specifically what you're looking for. Somebody who could actually handle the merchandise for you. Offering expedited shopping options. Maybe let somebody pre-shop a store, come in, pull some merchandise ahead of time that you might be interested in looking at, and pulling it off to a corner so you're not walking through the whole store if someone happens to be particularly nervous about coming back in store. The value that these associates can provide in making not only the experience better, but safer for people that may not want to come in and browse can have a big impact on getting people back into your store. And then finally, it's important to do what you can to protect those that are the most vulnerable among us. So, we recommend doing things like setting aside hours, ideally maybe in the morning. It's a great way to let everyone come into a store that's, both physically and emotionally safe. Somebody, maybe have a time for elderly or people with asthma or anybody that happens to be high risk. So, really, allowing the like-minded people, times to come in, and maybe people with higher anxiety times to come in, can really do a lot to help improve that emotional safety. And so now we'll take a step on and we'll move away from some of these shorter term changes to some of the longer term changes that are really due to these shifts in customer expectations. This is a pretty broad category. There's going to be really deep in here. So in order to contain the subject matter on the topic, what I wanted to do is really stick to those changes that both improve the customer experience, help meet some of those new expectations that the customers have as a result of the way that they've been shopping over the last couple of months, but also focus on, we'll call it the safety aspects of it. So kind of keeping with that theme of the changing expectations that have been born out of this idea to help keep shoppers and employees safer. We can go much broader than that, but so this is a nice way to kind of narrow it down and fit it within the time frame. So this chart right here is showing e-commerce penetration over the last 10 years. So you see here from 2009 to 2019, we're gonna have a relatively linear growth rate. We're kind of just eking up here in a nice clip, but a fairly linear style. And of course, obviously, the last week, the penetration of e-commerce has skyrocketed because stores are closed. So you don't have an option to shop in many stores in many states. And so, we expect that this number is going to drop as stores start to reopen. But we don't expect it to go back down to sort of that linear equivalent, right? We don't expect it to end up down at, 17 point something, 18%. We expect it'll actually most likely stay much higher, probably in the 20, 22% range, which is a dramatic acceleration from the last 10 years. This is literally like a 4-year leap overnight. So a huge change in the way people shop. It's going to be, most likely long-standing. Some of the things that this has caused, some of the changes this has caused is obviously, buy online, pickup in store, curbside pickup, or what we can call click and collect capabilities. These things now have started to become table stakes. If you look at the 208% year-over-year increase in orders placed online and picked up at stores just in the month of April, right? That's a huge bump. Even more, 90% of the people who've tried curbside, they actually found it very convenient. It's been really easy for them. 75% of consumers that have subscribed, that already subscribed to multiple delivery services like Amazon, say they're going to continue to opt for curbside. So this is a change that we expect to continue to be requested by pretty much any retailer doing business. It may not necessarily have to be offered out of necessity or by regulation of the state, but by consumer demand more so than anything. Just to give you kind of like a fun fact, we actually implemented buy online, pickup in store, and curbside for a major retailer. And sales in some of those stores were actually on pace with last year's sales volume. So we're actually seeing in some cases some stores where people aren't dropping sales at all because they're offering this alternative. So it's not just a nice way to help boost sales during issues where you're having trouble bringing people in store, but long term we think it's a good way to help drive growth and revenue as well of your stores. So coming out of here, we feel like there's 3 really sort of impactful trends, if you will, that we wanted to bring up. The first being that stores need to do more, right? That the role of physical stores is expanding to take on new capabilities. And there's different levels of maturity that we'll talk about as we move through these types of stores. Customers are also expecting more options when they engage and shop with you. So their expectations of you have evolved in the way that you interact and engage with them, in the ways that they can shop with you. They've evolved a little bit. And then, we'll hit on loyalty a bit more, but more than ever, like loyalty is super important now. And this is mainly a result of the fact that, the move of people to a lot of e-commerce shopping channels means a lot of the brands that they tend to favor now have a direct relationship with them. So the loyalty that you create with your customers and the programs that you offer to them are super important right now. So when we go to look at the store's new role, we generally bucket it into 3 sort of big groups in terms of what the table stake expectations are now. At the very basic level, a branded shoppable mobile first website, the ability to do buy online, pick up in store, or curbside. And then, probably more so on the optional side is marketplace participation. The reason we threw marketplace participation in here is a lot of times that, what we frequently go to shopping centers or malls for is the convenience aspect of it. I can go get multiple things with one stop. And the big marketplaces online, the Amazons, the eBays, these are essentially the digital versions of shopping malls or shopping centers. And so as people get more accustomed to using them, your participation in some of them really helps put you in those convenient spots. And I'm not necessarily saying go out and hop on Amazon, although it's a valid strategy for some people. But there's lots of options. Facebook just rolled out its new shop app. Shopify, I think, has an option. They have a localized marketplace. Creating your own marketplaces with a couple of complementary brands or options. So, considering how you look at options like that, and how you offer a digital presence, if you don't want to maintain your own website, are good things to consider, or good ways to look at it being online, and sort of spreading the number of ways that you can involve with your customers. On the more advanced side, we're looking at obviously providing everything on the basic side of the house, but plus doing things like buy online, return to store, multiple fulfillment options. So what we mean by that is the ability to, maybe what we call a split order. So I can make a purchase. I can have some part of that purchase emailed or mailed to me. I can have some part of that purchase set aside to pick up from store. Maybe I'm in a particular interest where something I need right away, or maybe something I really want to try it on before I purchase it. So I set it aside at the store, and in another aspect, I'm like, yeah, you can just send it to me. The ability to act as a replenishment point for other stores. So starting to do things like ship from store, or shipping from store to store, start to become some of those more advanced capabilities that allow you to do fulfillment on a different, or on a little bit more advanced level. And then talk of things like, what we would call niche. So acting as things like a micro fulfillment center or a dark site. So, a lot of times these tend to be lower performing stores, or stores you want to repurpose. But they focus on things like last mile delivery, or maybe replenishment of your local retail stores, or maybe just as pickup points for operations. So looking at how we definitely move into those, what we want to offer at each stage it's something that's valuable to look at, both from what I want to do today, as well as what kind of roadmap I have and where I want to go tomorrow, depending on my own strategy for growth and size. When you drop it on a pyramid, it looks something like this. So, at that very basic bottom level, it's basically just to buy online, pick up in stores, which requires you to be able to do things like, have a good idea of your inventory visibility. Not just in store, but if you have multiple stores, or if you're running distribution centers, having the ability to really understand and let people know what's available in store or not starts to become much more important. Email notifications, local tax. A lot of times you think tax is not a big deal, but if you have two stores sitting near a state border that have different tax rates, and somebody purchases and then the transaction happens from a store across the border, you have to be able to deal with that kind of tax rate. So having just some basic facilities in there, to allow you to do that, a POS in store that allows you to sort of scan codes and figure out which items are which. These are really just kind of those basic capabilities. On the technical side, this really isn't that hard. Most major platforms, it's just enabling it, right? Square Online Store, Shopify on the SMB side, the Magentas, the Salesforces on the large side, the big commerces and everybody in between, they all support this type of functionality. It's the logistics that tend to be the more complex aspects of it. When you're dealing, as you begin to move up to things from ship from store, starting to have a more sophisticated order management system, that can handle things like sourcing and scheduling, doing some level of carrier integration, starting to add things like packing and printing stations. It becomes more important because you're starting to actually ship merchandise out of store. So you have to have the ability to weigh and print labels and actually ship them, as well as the documented procedures that go along the way. Again, return in store starts to add a little bit more complexity. So you start to have to deal with point of sale feeds, because you have to start to maintain inventory in stores and understand where merchandise is that may be shipped out of a distribution center but came back to my physical store. So better handle on store inventory all the way up to single day delivery, where you have to start to manage service level agreements with your different carriers and managing your customer confusion. And so it's easy to get caught up in a lot of the technical aspects of enabling these experiences, but to be honest with you, we see it fall down much more in the customer experience side of the equation. And so, it really gets into sort of some of the basics of it, right? So on average, when a person goes to pick up an order in a store or curbside, they expect this to take about 20 minutes. Anything that you can do to beat that expectation increases the satisfaction of your customers, and it also increases the likelihood that they'll do this again, that they'll buy from you and do it again. So simple things like notifications. right? You know, I can't, this is an odd thing, but you have to be super explicit in your order confirmation emails because people don't read them. They see, hey, I got your order, and they're like, oh, that means my order is ready. And then they'll head straight to your store, and they'll show up, and you'll be like, I don't have your order yet. Did you get an order ready confirmation? I'll be like, yeah, right here. And like, no, that just means we have your order. You know, congratulations. So the more explicit that you can be in your emails, it's like, hey, I got your order. It's not ready yet. I'll send you another note when it's actually ready for pickup. You know, the less hassles you have, or the less you'll have people showing up at your store ahead of time. If you have the ability to do geolocation, if you have an app or something, you know, anything that you can leverage to know when a customer is going to get there, where they're coming from, where they are in your parking lot, it really helps to not only like make that a more enjoyable transaction, but also really helps to shorten the time. So if you know they're coming, you can obviously get stuff ready ahead of time because people don't always show up when they say they will, surprisingly. Training, I can't stress this one enough, not just in how to use the systems or look up orders, but you know, how to handle picking off the floor, storage, retrieval. We've worked with a lot of people, some of them like really large retailers, and doing store visits where, you know, you can have 4 stores with 9 different ways of managing, you know, buy online, pick up in store, depending on which manager is in that day. So, you know, making sure, you know, spending the time to do that training and make sure that everybody's handling it the same way starts to create that consistency of experience that you know, most of your shoppers are really craving. Incentive structures, you know, to the extent that's possible, align associate incentives with the types of tasks that you're going to ask them to do. So if you have a bunch of commission-based associates who want to be on the floor because they're paychecked and then, you know, depends on how much merchandise they sell in store, they probably don't want to be picking, you know, product off the shelf or in back, like shipping it and storing it. So making sure that those incentive structures are aligned to the extent possible is a really good idea. And then as you begin to get scale, you know, we highly suggest looking at more sophisticated, you know, pick, pack, and ship systems. You know, systems that are meant to be run out of the back of a storeroom that can actually handle things like, you know, batch picking, so that you can, instead of picking one order every time it comes in, you can hold a bunch of orders and pick them all at once. You know, things that leverage scanners that you can use and binning systems at back so orders don't get confused. And then, you know, as we start to order more, as we start to look at some of these types of changes, you know, you have to, you ultimately end up in a discussion about footprint. So, you know, we do think at some point retail stores should start to consider what the right balance between sort of experiential spaces and fulfillment and logistical spaces. If you find yourself in a situation where you're doing a lot more curbside or BOPUS type of transactions, you're probably going to need more space in back, and you're probably going to have to reclaim some of your retail space up front. So looking at whether you can set aside, you know, 10% more and take 10% off your retail space is really, you know, I'd say I'd really start to look at your logistics. And then ultimately, if you have, you know, the luxury of having multiple stores and you have some lower performing ones, you know, if they have the options to convert some of those into, you know, micro fulfillment centers or dark sites, where you can start to funnel all of your sort of your curbside types of traffic, you know, that's a good way to save your retail space. So, you know, I have my experiential retail locations, and then I have my, you know, my curbside locations that are focused mainly on fulfillment operations, replenishment, that kind of stuff. So, you know, really looking at how your operation runs is something that we highly suggest. And from here, let's talk about evolving customer expectations. So the important thing to keep in mind with the interplay between digital and physical channels is that it does create a new set of customer expectations. When it comes to consumers, you know, there's an old saying that their last best experience becomes their minimum future expectation. So as we continue to have people offer more sophisticated ways of engaging with us, more convenient ways, more enjoyable ways, we start to expect that of everybody. So, you know, as all of these things change, they're going to look for you to provide some of the similar capabilities. So some of the ones that we pulled up top, just that are kind of somewhat focused on this theme of safety, but also an evolving expectation, or I'll call them pre-shopping tools. Store capacity is limited anyway, so providing options to schedule times to come in and shop at a specific sort of time of the day is a great way to control traffic, but it also offers a really good chance to create a personal shopping experience. It's a great chance to get to know your customer better. If you end up going down this route, the ability to send invitations and appointment reminders will be a type of capability that you need to add. People are busy, life's complex right now. It's easy to forget and lose track of things. So adding this option ensures people show up for their slots, but it also gives you a way of communicating with them going forward, right? If you have an email, minimally an email address or maybe a phone number, it allows you to text appointment times or reminders to them. You got an email address that you sent the invitation to originally. Now I have two mediums of communication with my customers, and it also allows me to begin building a profile. Co-shopping, things like using tools like Hero or even Zoom are a great way to let people co-shop with associates from their home. They can check on availability of items, let them see merchandise over video streams, or even set aside items for pickup and purchase later. It reduces traffic, minimizes returns, and it's great customer service to those who may not be ready to enter and just like browse through a store yet. So that ability to co-browse, we love to reduce returns. So letting people see the material, the make of a specific product, again, is a nice little add to the types of features that you have. For those that are coming to your store, certainly in some states where the capacity restrictions are a little bit heavier, those that are only limiting, allowing, like, say, 30% of shoppers into stores, trying to figure out what you do with the queue is a really good idea. So, anything that you can do to entertain people while they're sitting in the store queue is a really valuable option. So it can be, having, a mobile-friendly site that makes it really easy to look at merchandise. It can be, the ability to interact with associates inside the store. Making Wi-Fi available, so they can do something while they're sitting outside. It makes the wait time feel a lot shorter, and it can even increase the impulse purchase and average items per order. So, having options that let people play is kind of important, especially in a situation where people tend to shop more expediently. That sort of, the type of those days where we just, kind of browse through stores at a nice slow pace, looking at racks. People tend to want to be more expedient right now, and it will likely reduce the number of impulse purchases. So if we can get people thinking more broadly before they enter the store, it might be a good way to pick that back up again. I mentioned this earlier, but enabling contactless payment, just having little contactless terminals around is a really nice way. As we try and move people away from cash toward credit card, if that's your goal, certainly it's one of those things that a lot of retailers are trying to do as a way so that we're not handling money back and forth. This is a really nice way to do it, and it frees up your associates, across the floor, and allows us to sort of help people wherever they are. Which is a good way of leading up to the fact that, this idea of mobile, if you haven't thought about mobile a lot recently, like, mobile is a linchpin between customers and brands today. It's super, super important. And if you haven't thought about it before, especially in the outdoor category, you should be seeing 60% or more of your traffic coming from a mobile device. If you aren't, you're under indexing. And it's likely because your mobile experience may be lacking. Which of course means you're potentially losing sales. So, you think about, let's, classic impulse rate purchase. Somebody's outdoors, they discover a need. Maybe they're missing an item when they're out on a camping trip, or they see a piece of equipment that a person in the group has that they really want. And they have the option on their phone to go out and say, check it out right there. But if you don't offer a mobile experience, or the one that you have is really difficult to use, you potentially lose that sale right there. So, making sure you spend some time to think about mobile and how you're incorporating that in. I'd highly suggest taking some time to do it. And we're not necessarily saying you need a mobile app, but certainly think about the mobile web type experience. There are options like personal web apps, things that allow you to add a little bit more advanced sophistication to it without necessarily having to go the route of creating a native mobile application. But when you look at things like scheduling appointments, entertainment queues, showrooming, it's a big part of customers' experiences and where they are. And then the last category I really wanted to look at was what I'm calling, just elevating loyalty and the way we look at loyalty. If you're a multi-brand retailer or wholesaler, over the past 3 months, the brands that you rep have had the opportunity to connect directly with your customers. By the same time, customers have also learned during the same time that they can go directly to the brands, and in many cases be rewarded with better prices, different loyalty program options, perhaps broader ranges of products that they don't necessarily find in your stores. And since they couldn't purchase from your store, they may have made the purchase directly from that brand and found it pretty convenient. And to be honest with you, and when they purchase directly from the brand, that brand makes more money itself on that transaction. So as you start to think about reopening your stores, retailers are a super important part of the ecosystem and will absolutely continue to be so, especially as things get back to normal. But, we may not see 80% of revenue coming purely from physical stores again, certainly not anytime soon. So putting some thought into how you incentivize people to come to you is a really worthwhile step. I mentioned this before, but online marketplaces that offer the convenience of malls. If someone's looking for a one-stop shop and convenience, obviously they've gone to a retailer shopping center for. They've been doing it in online marketplaces now. So, and these guys are experts at understanding what drives purchases and how to weave that into their recommendation. I pulled this screenshot off of Amazon, where they have all of their editorial recommendations for, in this case, the best climbing gear. I've recruited experts, brought them in, to take the place of the knowledgeable associates in stores. So making sure that we give people a good reason to come back to stores and to sort of claim those same benefits that you may think was unique to stores may not necessarily be unique to stores. So we'd recommend if you have a loyalty program, or if you don't have a loyalty program, we'd certainly recommend creating one. But reconsider the perks of the program, right? Retool the rewards. If it's focused solely around, points per dollar spent, I'd start to look at some expanding the types of perks that you offer. If you're going the appointment route, having priority shopping times that are available to rewards program members, express lines to get into crowded stores, or special curbside pickup lanes. These are things that can really help bring people back tomorrow, when we're dealing with these short-term solutions, as you begin to look at the types of perks that you may want to offer longer term and how you expand it beyond the simply transactional nature. And then, the final thing I'd like to say is, this is the time to make those connections with your customers personal again. Both through in-person transactions as well as digital channels, right? Emails that are more than just promotional, but also informational. Leverage the opportunity to do personal or expedited shopping to gather information on your customers' preferences, and then add that information into your customer profiles. And do this in a manner so that whenever they interact with you again, whether it be in store or online, you can deliver a much more customized and personalized experience. Everybody loves it when you show up at the door and you know who they are. and you know what types of things that they prefer. When somebody is searching online for, I need a high-performing pair of hiking shoes, and you know that they tend to favor particular types of brands, and maybe you can surface some of those to the top, or maybe you know the particular region of the country that they're in. So you recommend brands that are either by local manufacturers, or maybe they're ones that perform well under the conditions that they're likely to encounter. Anything that we can do to really bring that out, make it more personal, is going to really heighten that loyalty and help people coming back to stores, as opposed to just going direct to consumer. Or I can probably find transactional advantages, or maybe price advantages. And we're about at 1:45, so I thought I'd probably take some time out to look at questions if there are any. So give me 1 second to pull up what's going on. All right. First question is, what are your thoughts on requiring customers to wear masks in store? Great question. I think the masks for customers in store, there is data to say that it does help from the physical safety perspective. But I would probably recommend this to be a very regional decision. In states in densely urban area, or in more urban areas or densely populated areas, areas like New York, New Jersey, Chicago, where we've seen, we have large groups of people, we've seen outbreaks happen, mass on consumers makes a lot of sense. If you tend to be in more rural areas where you tend to have fewer outbreaks, I'd leave it up to the customers themselves. It's probably not quite as important. I know another person had asked me the question of, if you're looking to implement something like buy online, pickup in store, or curbside pickup, how long does something like that traditionally take? The answer is it depends. It varies quite a bit, depending on what kind of experience you want to offer and what platforms you're on. In general, though, I mean, we've done it in a week. At a very, very basic level, but we've done it in probably 4 days. Probably on average, it's probably more like 4 weeks, and it can take much longer depending on the sophistication once you add. But 4 to 6 weeks is probably an average. Another question: in the MasterCard switch data, how much of the increase in card use is attributed to households using credit for utilities, bill paying due to unemployment, and decreased cash flow? It's an excellent question. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. It's a rolled up transaction, so it didn't actually break it. Actually, let me check the data once again. That might be simply. Let me go back to it real quick. Switch volume, MasterCard. No, it's just operating metrics. Okay. I was looking to see if that was localized into a specific sector, whether it was retail, but no, that's just a general trend. So it's possible that some percentage of that was people using credit cards to pay bills. I suspect that, just given the volume though, that you're seeing a real retail bump in there as well, as people going back and actually purchasing more product. Another likelihood is it could be stimulus checks. Right around that time, I believe the stimulus checks were starting to come out. So you're starting to see a bump in buying versus as people are starting to get the stimulus checks come in. How do you see gift with purchase items working in the future? Gift with purchase is a great perk. I think especially as you start to move away from things like product testers. If you're in if you offer, or if you previously have offered testers of anything from beauty products to sunscreen to moisturizers, obviously those things are going away now. So starting to add samples Same thing with, could be a form of trail mix or any type of product. But I'm a firm believer that sampling is probably the new tester. The big thing there is going to be the logistics around making it profitable. Sampling is obviously a lot more expensive to do than simply putting a tester out in the store. So you have to have a much better handle on your sales and in your trends and in your product inventory, so that you're not necessarily producing a ton of samples that are going to end up sitting in your showroom. But I love the idea. Let's see. Are there any good practices for sanitizing garments between customers trying them on? Yes. In terms of sanitizing products between customers, you put them back in the storeroom. I like the idea of steaming them. The steamer produces about 212 degrees of heat. The virus dies at about 167 degrees. So, and it's pretty quick too. So we're not looking at it sort of spraying chemicals on a product, but I think steamer is a really nice option for cleansing garments after somebody's tried them on. The store has truncated hours during lockdown for curbside pickup. Do you think customers will expect full hours upon state, country reopening? I think this one goes back to I'll call this a proactive orientation. Everybody has different expectations, and frequently expectations are what you set. So I would highly recommend, a store, getting together with, maybe the other, if you happen to be in a shopping center and the managers of the different shops around you, I'd get together ideally and make a group decision if you could, so that you all have similar procedures. If not, I would 100% set your own expectations. And if you feel it's appropriate to have truncated hours, then I would absolutely do it. If you feel it's appropriate to, take people's temperature before they enter the store, I would do that. I don't necessarily recommend the temperature thing. It's probably a good practice for employees, but I don't know that I'd recommend it for your shoppers coming into the store. But I do believe in setting expectations. Apple is a good example of that, right? Apple probably has some of the strictest, guidelines and protocols for people coming into their stores as they started to reopen them. But they're in a position where, we all have to have our Apple products, so we're willing to put up with it. But they've been very forthcoming about setting those expectations, so I would do the same. All right, the outdoor industry has a broad range of competitors in a bigger picture. Murals, summer concerts, sports games, the list of normal activities that are not allowed as long. Outdoors open for business. How best do you see reaching into the households that normally are so busy with activities that are now not allowed? Great question. Well, and I think one of the things that we certainly could see is that, certainly the interest is there. And so, I think the ideal is to look to ways that we can, I think in the terms of, things like outdoor events, we've all started to understand that there are some things like virtual outdoor events that we may have to, and they're starting to take place now, but looking at it, maybe how we facilitate those outdoor events. So, many states that start to reopen are allowing gatherings of people, let's say 10 or less. So maybe you start to offer different ways of experiencing, let's say, a virtual concert with a group of friends. Maybe you partner up with, I don't know, like a Best Buy, and start to let people rent like outdoor TVs and outdoor sound systems, so that a group of 15, 10, 20, whatever your state allows, people can get together and experience a concert or event in the way they might normally. Sporting events that people are missing out on, just encouraging people to get out in the open. I was at the beach this weekend, and it was cold at the beach, but I got to tell you, it was pretty empty. And I was a little surprised by it. So I thought, I think the things that we can do to encourage people to get out and experience nature, which is actually one of the safest places to be. the way that the virus is sort of transferred, it tends to dissipate. You need a certain volume of the virus to land on you and, in your eyes, nose, something, in order to actually contract the disease. And, the minute it hits air, especially if you're upwind, it tends to dissipate quite quickly. So, encouraging people to get outdoors and be safe is probably one of the things that I think would be a good. Let's see. You said, what's the best way to sanitize glasses or even goggles? Downhill mountain biking, ski and snowboard goggles, luxury leather goods. Good question. In cases of things like goggles, you're looking at plastic. And plastic is actually one of those surfaces where the virus can live for up to 7 days. So, sanitizing with products, it's, I don't know that I do. You have a range of options, different types of cleaners. I guess in the notes or the comments section, I can include a page with some options for you. Both eco-friendly ones as well as ones that maybe use some of the more traditional types of products. Obviously you can use things like alcohol wipes or things that you might traditionally use, but I think there's some probably more eco-friendly ones that you could leverage as well. And let me see, I think we have one more. What are your thoughts on expanding into different channels as a new source of sales? Especially now when we've lost spring and summer, seems uncertain. Different channels is a new source of sales. I am not sure how to answer that. I don't know what you mean by channels. Let me see if I missed any others. I'm sorry. Let me give that some thought. And good practice in sanitizing, truncated hours, competitors. All right. Well, that is all the questions that I've received from the group. We're at one. Okay, we're at, well, we have about 3 minutes left. 1:57 here on the East Coast. So I guess I'd like to say thank you for everyone who joined. I hope this was informative. And as I'll answer the one question, let me give you the one question I didn't necessarily have a good answer for, some thought. I'll include some links to both companies that have, that have made products or donated products, that would be nice places to patronize. I'll also include a link to the sanitizers, and I'll give you a little bit more thought to the question around expanding into different channels as a new source of sales. But thanks again. Have a great day and stay safe.